I think the common ground that I heard and that instills some faith to me is that he says that he experiences confusion. That on the one hand, everything in that poem is an experience. It's based on experience. It's based on a perspective. For me to hear that poem with the second person pronoun you feels contentious. It's a little bit difficult for me to hear you read me that poem with the relationship that we already have, and so I have to sort of take that feeling of division that we have and sort of think, okay, this is a poem and this is based on not necessarily me personally, but it does go to and it does speak to what I think we also share in common, and that is objectification. I feel objectified all of the time when I'm in uniform. Sometimes people are over-ingratiating, want to buy coffee, want to do these kind of things, and it's like, you know what, I just want to do my job. When 9/11 happened, we had people that would want to come up and say, thank you so much for your service and this kind of thing, and it's all meant well. We just want to do our job. But we're inhibited from doing our job from that might be a positive ideal. That might be the positive where, you know, people in the community are thanking us. That's great. There's also there's a negative mythos there too. That negative mythos is perpetuated not by African American activists. It's by every single police officer that commits crimes against the citizenry. I think the thing that we agree on is there's nothing worse than a dirty cop. And I think that that's a basis. The other thing that I heard from you that I think is important that brings that together is that you said every time you've needed an officer, the officer has had your best interest. So you've experienced that. The negative experience that you have, or the negative feelings that you have, are protective feelings. They're survival feelings. The good feelings you have are pleasant, but they don't really touch you in that survival way. They don't threaten you. And being threatened is different. It's a different thing. And I feel the exact same way. Is that feeling threatened is a different emotion. And that where we come together is that neither one of us are willing to presume that because our uniforms are different that we're necessarily on a different side.
So that feels like a very key issue.
Absolutely.
The presumption issue. And again, because of time, it would be hard to pursue that too far. But one thing it makes me think about is even whether this kind of process could be helpful, both in the community and with police officers, where it's more of a one-on-one sharing of experience, facilitated, hopefully, a safe and optimally safe setting to do that. That's just one thought that came to mind.
I'd like to point something out, and that is that Nathaniel here is representing, I don't know what the number is, but he's representing a population of the United States. As an individual, he's sitting here and he's the spokesperson for a race. Okay? And I'm sitting here as a spokesperson for a very diversified and very decentralized occupation. And that puts us in positions of responsibility for actions that we're not responsible for, and for attitudes we're not responsible for, and for a historical trajectory that neither one of us created. And yet what we're doing is we're sitting down person to person and saying, okay, well, all of the historical trajectory, all of the establishment and who's unestablished and all that really is important stuff to understand, but at some point, he and I have to meet together, and we have to do something about it, where the story carries on.
It could break the story here in some way, or at least.
Maybe for us, maybe for some of you. But the other part of it too is that we agree upon is that when it comes to street encounters, there's a healthy fear on both sides. And that is, it doesn't really matter if the person's skin color is this or that, whatever. I intimated that there are a lot of behaviors and there are a lot of things that transcend whether it's a hoodie or not. There are ways that thugs in the neighborhood communicate to the neighborhood who they are, just as much as we communicate to the neighborhood who we are. And you know them when you see them too. And so when I go out into the neighborhood, I don't know where the bad guys are. I've been on calls where I've been shot at from elsewhere, from I don't know where. And that kind of a thing is very fear-provoking. And so I go out there with a healthy fear. But I think as long as we keep that fear healthy, and we keep that fear within perspective, I think that that's really the goal. I think the other thing too, your poem said this, is I'm not afraid of you. The only thing that makes me not afraid out in the street is that I'm very, very well trained and I'm really good at what I do. And I think that confidence is something that gives me a little bit more capacity to stop and think a little bit. And unfortunately, my knowledge in law enforcement is that there are a lot of officers nationwide that their training is funded by whatever local taxes are paid. And impoverished communities do not pay to train their officers. And they pay them in things that are going to get them sued, like shootings and things like that, instead of how to talk to people.
So maybe funding would be a really important component to
Funding
this situation.
Funding's part of it. Funding's
training.
part of it, but it's access. It's access in a bigger way, because we can't throw money any more than we can throw politics at a problem like this and have it solved. It has to be engaged by people.
Engagement, support for engagement. Thank you both profusely for, again, allowing yourselves to engage in this quite intimate dialogue, interchange. I'm very touched by what you've presented, and I hope it's duly helpful. So I'd like to take just a few minutes right now for
Move on or celebrate or something.
We'd like to take just a few minutes right now for your input, for your reflections about what you've just experienced. And I say a few minutes because both Roger and Nathaniel have a couple of exercises that they'd like to engage us in that could help to deepen this dialogue, this understanding. And then we'll wrap it up with hopefully a longer period of discussion. Yes? Lisa?
Sure. I had two very interesting responses. When Roger sat down, this is the first time I've seen you in uniform. And I actually had a physical, like, where I was like, well, like I felt jarred because it's so different than how I see you as a person. And it was just a weird response for me. Because suddenly you became not the Roger that I knew, and then I realized how much of the objectification that I have internalized. And I was like, wow, this is interesting, because that was my experience. Then when you pulled your hoodie up, I had this like really visceral emotional response around how yucky that feels. I don't know, that's like a really weird word to use, but it just felt like really heavy and painful, that just something as simple as pulling up a hood could be have so much meaning in our current social climate. And what you said about your training officer that said, the white man will take your job, the black man could take your life. My thought was like, but you're Roger, and you don't see things. You're capable of critical thinking and that kind of stuff that, you were able to tease that out and say, like, that's not really true. I wonder how many others went through that training that don't have that capability and never reached that same conclusion and are still pulling people over today thinking this man could take my life.
So
And-
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Well,
So-
that just leads me to a question of how, in a nutshell, how do you feel that happened for you?
I think it's a matter of location. I think one of the biggest problems that we have in this country is we talk about the police. We don't have a national police force in the United States like centralized places. In Germany, they have a national police force. In Russia, they have a national police force. In Asia, there's Asian countries that have a national police force. And I never really thought about what a decentralized police meant until I started reading an ethnography that a colleague of mine did. He did an ethnography on Japanese police. And Japanese police were decentralized and over local control in the American model after World War II. After World War I, Japanese took on a European model of having a national police. Well, we talk about the police, and it really becomes an abstraction in the same way that we talk about the black community. Well, I've known various black people and experienced a lot of different, I had a lot of different experiences across the black community. So I don't believe there is a the black community. However, I do recognize that first response, and that first response that Lisa talked about with how she felt about me is the same kind of response that Nathaniel has expressed to me that he gets when, from other people, like if they find out or he comes into a place and people look longer or whatever. I got so much more involved in Nathaniel's work on microaggressions because everything that he talked about is something that I experienced.
And I appreciate that, and I guess I also wonder if your psychological training had something to do with your openness or your discernment with this issue, and if that's something that you feel could be important for police departments.
Yeah, it was evolutionary. When I
Briefly,
when I actually went back to college, that was when I started really getting exposed more to, I went into a psychology program as an undergrad. That's when I got more exposed to these kinds of things and these kind of thinking. But before that, like I said, I'm very, very well trained and I'm good at what I do. And so as a crime fighter, when it comes to, I was one of those guys that out on the street when other guys were in trouble and they called for help, I was one they wanted to show up really quick because I'm pretty good in a fight and I can drive a car really fast and I can shoot really straight. I'm pretty good at what I do. I started training police officers when I was 23 years old. So I've been a police officer 2 years when I started teaching officers. And so, but that's a skill set that now has to be also complemented by a skill set that really, if you even look at the ancient samurai talk about, that if you can walk away or if you can have that fight end peacefully before there's any punches thrown. And I learned in my as I got older too, and as I worked patrol at least once a month. I don't want to fight with a 20-year-old because one thing I know about fights is both people get hurt. And, an afternoon in the ER getting your hand patched up or whatever it is, if it's scrape on the knee, torn pants have to be replaced, all of it is a bigger hassle than it would be if we just basically say, how are we going to communicate so that we can get business done? And I think that that's where that comes.
So I'm hearing again the significance of engagement, personal engagement, communication, big themes.
I would like to highlight.
Relationship is so very important, establishing a relationship from an existential humanistic perspective. I think that has helped me a lot. And instead of seeing cops, it's just cops. I have to look at cops humanistically just as much as I look at myself humanistically. And understand, I have to understand Roger's meaning, you know, as well as I do my own, and I have to honor his meaning when he feels fear. I mean, right before this presentation, we were in the hall, we both were exchanging our nervousness with each other relative to this presentation. And he honored my nervousness, and I honored his nervousness. And even though it's coming from two different perspectives, the nervousness itself doesn't know that. It's just nervousness.
Acknowledgement is important.
I just wanted to kind of speak on my reaction, and I think it ties into a little bit what you were saying about first response, and now, Nathaniel, what you were saying about kind of this necessary self-examination. And the thing that was coming up for me was this relationship between implicit bias and power, which I think, I'm not sure how much that really gets discussed, because I think for a lot of us, irrespective of our racial backgrounds, we do hold these implicit biases of which we're not aware. So even when, looking at some of the testing that they've done with individuals who are primed by a particular face, a particular race, and then given a question like Black people are, more fearful than white people, and then looking at the response time that it takes for an individual to then press like yes or no. And we know that some of us, as Black people, as white people, as Asian people, whomever we are, we hold some of these kind of fears about the other and about ourselves even. So when that comes in contact with power, and we understand power as being held within the establishment or within the police force, and you spoke about the system and the bureaucracy. So I think part of that fear is that when individuals who are in the system, who as human beings have this kind of implicit bias, what happens when those two come in contact? Because as an individual, an individual might not have this, I'm pulling over this person because they're Black. Like you said, you don't know if that person's Black oftentimes when you pull them over. But what is the kind of, what happens on that implicit level when then you do see what race they are? So I thought that was something that was coming up for me when I was hearing both of you.
Thank you. Maybe one other question right now.
Really powerful. Thank you, both of you, for investing. And I'm curious about the link between who's impacted in this room. You're both impacted, but how can we, as people interested in positive social change, be thinking about how to maximize that impact, turn it into a more powerful impact at a policy level, dealing with the structural issues beyond just right here in this circle, in this room. And you mentioned training. I mean, I think training is really powerful and really important. I'd like to hear from both of you, what kind of training and what access do you think, particularly in conservative communities where police are potentially conservative and the structure is conservative, what kind of training would be most, would have the most, most impact? And just one small thing I want to say, I worked in Liberia for a number of years at the grassroots level with community policing, and I was a civil affairs officer. But it's fascinating. Every country has these issues in different ways, and it's not necessarily about race. Oftentimes it's about the structure of authority and how that's abused or not abused.
To answer that, if I may, yeah. I think one of the greatest trainings would be a greater focus on multicultural awareness. I'm not talking about a 2-week course and you get a certificate, but I'm talking about maybe a 6-month course or a year course in order to understand the nuances associated with different cultures and to understand different cultural behaviors or behaviors that are unique to various cultures. I know as African-American males, matter of fact, even in the DSM, African-American males meet the criteria of antisocial personality disorder. You know, when the truth of the matter is their behaviors are basically just a way of survival. And even though it meets the criteria of antisocial personality disorder, they're simply trying to survive in the hood or whatever the case may be. And I think cops, you know, law enforcement need to understand that, you know. If you tell me to take my hands out of my pocket and put my hands up, I mean, it's not that I have a weapon, but maybe I don't even understand. Maybe I'm just so afraid, maybe whatever, you know. Don't just shoot me because I didn't respond as quickly as you thought I should respond, because I'm afraid, and when I'm afraid, I freeze up. You know, I'm hearing you, but my body doesn't want to react because I'm stuck, you know. So I think it's very important to, I think one of the biggest focus should be on multicultural trainings relative to multiculturalism and diversity, and understanding, and cultural empathy. If there's trainings based on you coming out of your uniform and putting on blackface or whatever the case might be, knowing what it's like to be black for a day, knowing what it's like to be a black male in the hood for a day.
Would you reverse that also for the community, let's say the black community, or perhaps some of the black community
To be a
know what
cop
it's
for a
like to be a
day.
cop for a day?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there needs to be an exchange of training, not just for the law enforcement, but even for the community, workshops.
Any brief?
I think what Nathaniel said is right on, and I don't know whether it's because we've talked about this before, but the frustration that I have with being a bureaucrat is that it is about a 2-hour training or a 2-week training and a certificate, so that then the bureaucrats, the policymakers can say, we've done something about this. So the next officer that shoots a black man is completely responsible for all of that, and we're going to say, hey, we got this multicultural program and we're good. They're doing that right now with first responder suicide. We're going to have a suicide intervention class, and we're going to bring a therapist to come in and talk about suicide prevention for 2 hours, and then the next officer that shoots himself, well, you know, that's not our fault because we provided training. And so my concern is that we have to be able to work within the system, but at the same time, stop working within the system, because the system hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for hundreds of years.
Absolutely.
Right, and so we've got to figure out, how do you get people to engage person to person? And one of the things that we do in this particular, I say within this, when the topic becomes about police and racism, we start talking macro level. And then we start talking about, well, it's not good enough to change a few people. What we need to do is we need to do policies, and then we do the bureaucrat thing all over again. Instead of saying, no, it's enough for those people that are in this room, and every one of you can go out and you'll get a stonewall, I promise you, because I assign my students to go out every semester and engage their police and fire departments just to let them ride along for a day. And they get a bureaucratic stonewalling like crazy, but if they can get in, they get a powerful experience. But if we can get people that want to do this kind of work that you're doing to get in
Outside
on
the
a
system.
local level, deal with your community, deal with your cops. If you want your children to be safe, you have to go to your police department and say, what can I do to participate, what can I do to help? And then they expect that healthy fear that they're going to say, I don't know who this guy is, and I don't know what he wants. Because the one thing that we do fear is, and we call it the newspaper test. If it doesn't pass the newspaper test, it doesn't matter what really happened. A black eye in the police department is a black eye in the police department.
Okay, so, again, in the interest of time, can we present your 6-minute film now?
It's 11,
Well, the whole thing's 11.
but I think we can do part of it. And then
Maybe
it's
just the
one.
part where he's engaged in the actions?
Yeah, I'm not really sure, you know, I'll look at it. I'm not really sure if his comments I think are the most powerful. Let's show a little bit of the video, and if we don't get to his comments, I'll make his comments on his behalf, and everybody can watch the video another
Thanks.
time. And I'll need the young lady to help with the
Oh, she's in the front.
video. She asked me.
I think a Daisy's gonna get her. Can you
Okay,
go?
great.
So while you're setting that up, I just want to say that this is the kind of thing that I believe could lead to a summary statement about what has been achieved in this relationship, in this encounter. And that statement could potentially then be turned into some kind of policy discussion, let's say at the legislative level. That's one of my ideals. As far as the confidentiality of a situation like this, it may be best to just have somebody record the outcome of an encounter like this, rather than the details of what is transacted between the people. And that outcome could be extremely valuable. I think we came up with some very valuable ideas that could be applied. Thinking of communication, face-to-face engagement, personal engagement. How do we bring that in?
For me, it was, we had a fishbowl situation, and it was extremely, and the two were facing each other, and talking in this representative way, which is a little artificial, but it was extremely impactful. And I don't know about ideas and putting it into policy and all that, but maybe there's some of that. But to me, it was just really moving. And I don't know where it's going, but it was really a marvelous process in terms of, certainly for myself, just putting me into a place of chaos, really, around this.
Well, I'm glad you underscored just the experience of
Yeah.
this.
Kurt,
Which I
can
felt
I
too.
address one thing that you said about the representativeness or that artificialness of that? One thing that I learned when I went through my race and diversity class is that when you're a minority person, regardless of whether it's gender or it's ableism, whatever, and you step into a group that is a homogenous group, so you're the one and they're the many, you become the spokesperson. You become the representative, and it's not artificial. What Nathaniel and I were anxious about, and you add to this or subtract from having, but what we shared was taking these roles and being representative creates real anxiety for us, because it's real for us. It's real. Every day I wear this uniform, I become an officer. I'm not a person anymore. And I'm painfully aware of the fact that because I'm not a person to normal people, that I'm a lot easier to shoot for everybody too. Nobody thinks about the fact that, like, I did some work with an officer that shot and killed a guy, and his 7-year-old son was defending his dad on the playground at the grade school, because this had gone into the media and it got into this big giant political thing. Here's a 7-year-old trying to defend his dad's honor. People don't think past this uniform that there's a family behind, and there's a mom back in Utah that worries every day I go out to work and wishes I would stop, and other people in my life. So the representativeness is not artificial. The artificial part of it is that you've got a police officer who has a PhD in humanistic psychology and a black man with a PhD in humanistic psychology, and so that does run some influence in here that makes us maybe a little bit, and we're friends.
No.
So that's one thing that there had to be a little bit of theater. There might be a little lack of inauthenticity simply because last night we were having a beer together.
I'm glad you disclosed that context. And we purposely did not want it scripted at the same time.
Yeah.
I feel like that came through. Are you ready with the thing?
I am.
Oh,
You take it on.
Yeah, and I want to say this with all due respect.
Sure.
I think, and I don't know exactly how to say this, but your comments are about them being artificial for me as a person, listening to them and being personally impacted, realizing how this was set up, but knowing that the experience and the meaning of the experience and how much it touches so many lives today in a very negative way, I don't understand how that could be judged. So simple.
You can keep it on.
Yeah, no, still on.
Will there be discussion later? about
We're
the
gonna,
process?
we're gonna try, yeah.
You don't want to get through just a couple things.
We're gonna try. Okay.
He is one of the most outspoken critics of police use of force here in the Valley, but he gets some on-the-job training about use of force tonight.
Very interesting stuff. Reverend Jarrett Maupin led protests and marches after Phoenix police shot and killed an unarmed man. Well, tonight he gets a chance to experience the split-second decisions that police have to make when encountering a suspect.
And our Troy Hayden was right along with him tonight, getting the training as well. This must have been eye-opening.
It was a really interesting experience. We've all watched those protests all over the country after police officers are accused of shooting people who aren't armed. But what would happen if one of those protesters felt what it was like to wear a badge and then be put in a life-or-death situation himself?
So I'm going to have you put the holster on right inside your belly there.
Jarrett Maupin gets his weapon. You might recognize him as a high-profile organizer in the minority community. Just last month, he led marches on Phoenix Police Headquarters after an officer shot an unarmed man.
We want his badge! We want his gun! We want his job!
Today, he accepted an invitation to look at things from the other side, agreeing to go through a force-on-force training session with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. 3 scenarios where you have to decide to shoot or not shoot. Scenario 1 is a call about a man casing cars in a parking lot. Maupin approaches the man and starts asking questions.
What? Whatever you're looking for your vehicle. What kind of car do you drive? Whatever you're doing. What kind of car do you drive? It's my car, man.
Maupin, the officer, is shot. It happens that fast.
At what time did you think that it was time for you to address the use of force that was given?
When he came to the back of the vehicle,
Okay.
and was hiding, you know, I could sense something was wrong.
Scenario 2, a call of 2 men fighting.
What's going on today, gentlemen? What's going on today, gentlemen?
What do you want?
What's happening here?
What's wrong with
Back
you?
up.
Huh?
What are you doing, man? Hey!
Hey, he shouldn't approach me. He shouldn't approach me.
We
He
were
shouldn't
just
approach me.
arguing
He shouldn't
about what
approach
happened
me.
in there.
Yeah.
What are you doing? You just shot him?
Hey, he rushed me.
Tell me why you shot.
Well, I'm shot because he was within that zone. You know, I felt there was an imminent threat. I didn't necessarily see him armed, but he came clearly to do some harm to the officer, to my person. It's hard to make that call. It shakes you up.
Again, an unarmed man was shot. Scenario 3, a call about a possible burglar walking down the street. Maupin gets him on the ground. He's not complying.
I need you to keep your hands up, sir.
For what?
Because I need to check that waistband.
For what? What are you doing?
Because I don't know what you have under there.
Everybody, look at this guy. What are you doing?
No shots fired, but the suspect did have a hidden knife in his waistband. I went through the scenarios too, without seeing what Maupin did.
Come on, do you have keys or do you have anything to show me that? No, I need to talk to you. Come on over here.
On deck.
Maricopa County Sheriffs, get on the ground. Get on the ground. Both of you, get on the ground. Get on the ground.
For what?
Get back.
Same results for both of us. Things happen very fast out here. I asked Maupin what his biggest takeaway from this exercise will be.
I didn't understand how important compliance was, but after going through this, yeah, my attitude has changed. This is all unfolding in 10 to 15 seconds. People need to comply with the orders of law enforcement officers for their own sake.
Thanks to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office for taking us through that today. It was an eye-opener.
That's a true.
Let's do it. Okay, I'm sorry we don't have a very smooth transition right now, but we need, because of time, and Nathaniel unfortunately has to leave for flight. We'd like to give Nathaniel a chance to present his exercise to us, and then we can discuss.
If we can, and I do apologize, we have a flight to catch, and so we have to be out of this room in the car by 4:15. And so if we can do the exercise and then maybe in our absence even process this particular exercise, that'd be great, and I'll get feedback from Kirk. What I would need is everyone to line up, and these chairs may be in the way. Oh, here's more room. If we can line up maybe this over here. We can do this way, that way we don't have to move many chairs.
You gonna keep it on? Yeah. Gonna keep it on? I think so. Might as well.
This way is,
Which material?
as we can line up evenly, everyone evenly. One line, one line, one horizontal line this way. All the way across the room. Across the room as best we can. Chairs. Because everybody's gonna have to come this way.
Move this, if we could just avoid the camera.
Oh, no, don't move the camera, don't move the camera, don't move the camera. Oh,
Just a little disclaimer, this exercise can be very triggering. And so, one of the things, the instructions ask is that if there's not enough time for you not to do the exercise, so because it can trigger some emotions, and it has for me many times I've done this exercise, or participated in this exercise. I'm going to ask questions and just ask for you to just follow the instructions. And actually, you have to take one step forward, everybody. Some of you guys are going to have to step back.
Huh? Oh.
And this is called the privilege walk exercise. Yeah, all of these have to come. All right. If your ancestors came to the United States by force, take one step back. If there were more than 50 books in your house growing up, take one step forward. If you ever felt unsafe because of your sexual orientation, take one step back. If you believe that you were denied employment because of your race, gender, or ethnicity, take one step back. If you believe that you were paid less because of your race, gender, or ethnicity, take one step back. If you were ever stopped or questioned by the police because of your race, take one step back. If you ever felt uncomfortable about a joke directed at your gender, take one step back. If you can show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, please take one step forward. If you were embarrassed about your clothes or house while growing up, take one step back. If your parents or guardians attended college, take one step forward. If you were raised in an area with crime and drug activity, take one step back. If you have tried to change your speech or mannerism to gain credibility, take one step back. If you are able to move through the world without fear of sexual assault, take one step forward. If you can legally marry the person you love, take one step forward. If you were sexually active with several people and it would improve your social reputation in other people's eyes, take one step forward. If you are reasonably sure that you will not be denied access to jobs or political resources because of your gender, take one step forward. If you are relatively sure you can enter a store without being followed, take one step forward. If you are reasonably sure you would be hired based on your ability and qualifications, take one step forward. If your family automatically expected you to attend college, take one step forward. If you have ever traveled outside the United States, take one step forward. If your parents work nights and weekends to support your family, take one step backward. If you can buy new clothes or go out to dinner whenever you want, take one step forward. If you get time off for religious holidays, take one step forward. If you can walk alone at any time of day or night in Saratoga without thinking about safety, take one step forward. If you went to galleries, museums, and plays with your family, take one step forward. If you attended private school or even summer camp, take one step forward. If you were raised in a single family household, a single parent household, take one step backwards. If you study the culture of your ancestors in elementary school, take one step forward. If members of your gender are portrayed on TV in degrading roles, take one step backwards. If you have been a victim of sexual harassment, take one step backwards. If you have been a victim of violence because of your race, gender, class, or sexual orientation, take one step back. If you ever went on a family vacation, take one step forward. There's a big step here. If you ever had a maid, gardener, or a cleaning service, take one big step forward. Or nanny, all default to that same category. All right, last one. If you can walk past a construction site without being looked up and down or catcalled, take one step forward. Excellent. This exercise is about privilege. Every statement addresses some small privilege that is based on gender, race, ethnicity, class, or sexual orientation. The small statements in this exercise have added up to divide people into different locations in this room. Similarly, small privileges in society place individuals in separate places in society. If we can just look around and see who is more privileged in this room and those who are least privileged. Those who are least privileged, how does it feel for you?
It feels about right.
About right?
Not accurate, yeah. I mean, that doesn't feel right, but it's not accurate.
Okay. Those who are, this is what I want to do. For those who are, right, this is an imaginary line here. If you are most privileged, if you are all the way in the front, this line right here, count how many steps does it take to get to me? How many steps from where you are to me? How many steps does it take? And actually, I want everyone to count how many steps does it take for you to get all the way up front. Lewis, because I think you were in front. How many steps did it take for you to get here? One step. Sanasha, how many steps did it take for you to get up here? 14. So it took you 14 steps to Dr. Hoffman's one step to get to the exact same position. How many steps did it take you to get all the way up here? 23. It took you 23 steps to make it to the same place it took Lewis Hoffman one step. And this is how privilege works. Sometimes when we think of privilege, we think it's something arbitrary, and that we all have the same amount of privilege and that everyone can make it if we just work hard. But the truth of the matter is, for every one step Lewis Hoffman had to take to make it, it took you 23 steps to have to make it. And so you had to work 23 times harder than Lewis Hoffman to get to the same position. How do you all feel about this? Does it evoke any type of emotion for anybody in the room? Yeah,
Separating.
It's very separating. And so when you're all the way in the front, you realize that the majority of society is behind you. You have a
Responsibility.
You have a responsibility because you are way ahead of the game. And so the responsibility is to go back and bring others forward. Yes.
I wanted to say to them, when you get there, you still have to work 10 times as hard. And I have to
stay there.
Right, and I have to say, in corporate America, I got there, but the feedback, which is interesting around power that I got, which is sort of true, but I couldn't get rid of the fact that I came from all the way there, is that I was told, and it was right, that you're an executive, you have power now, you have power over the people. So you've got to, recognize that, and you can't bring this other stuff because now you're privileged, but I'm privileged with all of this coming from back there and still having to do all of this in the moment.
So even though you're privileged, it's still different. It's not the same privilege because by the time you got there, you're tired after taking 40 steps as opposed to the person that took one step. So you may be there, but God, you had to work so much.
And then you still have to fight.
And then you still have to fight while you're there.
The challenge is, a lot of our cultural myths, you work hard, you get ahead, there are opportunities for everybody, we're not a class society, all of, you're an individual, no, you're part of a group, whether you like it or not, you're part of some group. So it really challenges a lot of others.
Absolutely. Guys, thank you so much. I wish I could stay more to even process this evening.
Going to live with as kids. Chicago.
Kirk, I'm going to leave the privilege exercise.
It's just like this. So people are thinking, work hard, you can become president. No.
It's not fair that some people are
Gather back if you would.
Yeah, that's why I said it seems